I need you to listen to me tonight. Not because I need your attention, but because there is something inside me that I have carried for far too long. Something I was afraid to say. Because once words leave your heart, they cannot be taken back. They become real. They become a decision. They become a moment you can never pretend did not happen. And I do not know how much time I have left to tell you this. Not because I am afraid of tomorrow. I have faced uncertainty my entire life. I have built things knowing they could fail. I have walked into rooms where nobody believed in what I was trying to create. I have made decisions with incomplete information and accepted the consequences. But loving you was different. With everything else in my life, I could calculate the risk. I could study the possibilities. I could prepare for failure. With you, I had no formula. I had no protection. I had no strategy. I only had my heart. And that terrified me more than anything I have ever built. Because when someone becomes important enough, they become the one thing you cannot replace, the one thing you cannot simply rebuild, the one thing you cannot lose and convince yourself that another opportunity will come. I have spent years learning how to control chaos. I have spent years understanding systems, predicting outcomes, and creating solutions. But I never learned how to control the feeling I have when I think about losing you. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that the thought of a future without them feels like looking at a world that still exists but somehow has lost its meaning? Have you ever looked at a person and realized that they quietly became part of your identity before you even noticed? That is what happened to me. Somewhere between the conversations we had and the moments we shared, you stopped being someone I simply cared about. You became the person I wanted to tell things to, the person I searched for in a crowded room, the person I wanted beside me when something amazing happened. And even more honestly, the person I wanted beside me when everything was falling apart. Because anyone can stand beside you when life is beautiful. Anyone can celebrate your victories. Anyone can smile when everything is easy. But the person who stays when you are exhausted, when you are uncertain, when you do not have answers, when you are no longer impressive, that person sees the truth. And you saw mine. That is what still surprises me. You did not fall in love with the achievements. You did not care about the things people noticed from a distance. You saw the person underneath everything. The person who sometimes questions himself. The person who sometimes feels alone even when surrounded by people. The person who can solve complicated problems but struggles with the simplest emotional questions. The person who knows how to build things but never understood how to protect his own heart. And maybe that is why I was afraid. Because you reached a place in me that nobody else had ever reached. You found the room I kept locked. The room where I kept my fears, my regrets, my memories of moments when I wondered if I was becoming someone successful but forgetting how to become someone loved. Tell me something. Have you ever looked at the life you created and quietly asked yourself, is this really everything I wanted? Have you ever achieved something you once dreamed about, only to realize there was still one empty space nobody could fill? I did. I had moments where people told me I had everything. They saw progress. They saw accomplishments. They saw a person moving forward. But they did not see the nights when silence felt louder than any criticism. They did not see the moments when I wondered who I would share my life with when the noise disappeared. Because success is strange. It can bring many people around you. But it does not guarantee that someone truly knows you. And then you came into my life, and suddenly I understood something I had spent years ignoring. The most valuable thing a person can have is not attention. It is not admiration. It is not being remembered by millions. It is having one person who looks at you and says, I know who you are, and I am still here. You gave me that feeling. And that is why this confession is difficult. Because when someone matters this much, love stops feeling like a beautiful story. It becomes a responsibility. It becomes a fear. It becomes a question. Can I protect what I love? Can I become the person you deserve? Can I promise you forever when I know life has a way of changing everything? I wish I could tell you that I was always certain. I was not. There were moments when I convinced myself that maybe distance was easier. Maybe silence was safer. Maybe walking away before losing you would hurt less than staying and risking everything. Have you ever pushed someone away? Not because you stopped loving them, but because you loved them so much that the possibility of losing them became unbearable. That was my mistake. I thought avoiding pain would protect me from pain. I thought keeping my emotions controlled would keep my heart safe. But I learned something too late. A protected heart can survive, but it cannot truly live. And you made me want to live differently. You made me want to stop hiding behind reasons. You made me want to admit that there are some things in life worth risking everything for. I know there may have been moments when you wondered about me. When you questioned whether my feelings were real. When my silence made you feel forgotten. When my hesitation made you feel like you were standing alone. And I wish I could go back to those moments. Not to change everything. Not to rewrite history. But to look at you and say what I should have said much sooner. I am scared because you matter. Not because I do not care. Not because I am unsure about you. But because loving you means accepting that there is something in this world I cannot control, you. Your heart, your choice, your future. I cannot force you to stay. I cannot demand that you understand every fear I carried. I cannot ask you to wait forever while I figure out how to become brave. Love does not work that way. Real love is not ownership. It is not control. It is not asking someone to disappear inside your life. Real love is looking at another person and saying, I want you free, even though losing you scares me. And that is the hardest truth I have ever accepted. Because part of me wants to hold on tightly. Part of me wants to make sure you never leave. But another part of me understands that if I truly love you, I have to love you with respect. I have to give you the space to choose me. Not because you feel trapped. Not because you feel guilty. But because your heart genuinely wants to come back. That is the kind of love I want. The kind that survives honesty. The kind that survives difficult conversations. The kind that does not collapse when reality becomes uncomfortable. I want you to know something. I have replayed so many moments in my mind. Small moments. Moments that probably meant nothing to anyone else. The way you looked at me when I was speaking. The way you noticed things I thought nobody noticed. The way you made ordinary days feel important. People often think love is created by grand gestures. But I think love is created in tiny moments that quietly become impossible to forget. A simple conversation, a shared silence, a look that says more than words, a moment when someone remembers something about you that even you forgot. That was you. You remembered me. And maybe I never told you how rare that is. Maybe I acted stronger than I felt. Maybe I pretended I did not need anyone because I was afraid of needing someone. But the truth is, Daniel needed you. Not because I cannot exist without you. I can. I have survived difficult moments before. I have rebuilt myself before. But there is a difference between surviving and living. And with you, I felt alive in a way I did not expect. I felt understood. I felt accepted. I felt like I did not have to constantly prove my value. And that feeling changed me. But there is something I need you to understand. There is a reason I am telling you this now. There is a reason these words have been waiting inside me. There is something I have been afraid to admit because I do not know what happens after I say it. I haven't told you the real reason yet. Because the truth is not just about how much I love you. The truth is about the moment when I almost lost the courage to choose you. The moment when I almost convinced myself that another path would be easier. The moment when I almost made a decision that would have changed everything between us forever. And that is the part that still hurts. Because sometimes the person who loves you the most can also become the person who hurts you the deepest. Not because they want to, but because fear can make people do things that do not match their heart. I need you to know that I have fought battles nobody saw. Not against other people, against myself. Against the part of me that believed vulnerability was weakness. Against the part of me that thought needing love meant losing control. Against the part of me that believed I had to choose between ambition and emotion. But you taught me something I never expected. The strongest person is not the one who never breaks. The strongest person is the one who finally admits what can break them. And you can break me. Not because you are cruel. Not because you have power over me. But because I care. Because your happiness matters to me. Because your pain affects me. Because your absence would leave a silence I do not know how to describe. So tonight, before anything changes, before another moment passes, I need you to hear this. You were never just a chapter in my life. You were the person who made me question the entire story I was writing. You made me ask whether I was building a future worth having if I had nobody special to share it with. And maybe that is the greatest gift anyone can give another person. Not an answer, a question. A reason to look deeper. A reason to become better. If you are listening to this and your heart has ever felt unseen, I want you to know something. I see you. Not the version of you that the world expects. Not the version that has to be strong every day. Not the version that hides disappointment behind a smile. I see the woman who has carried things quietly. The woman who has given love even when she was tired. The woman who has stayed strong when nobody asked how she was doing. And maybe that is why I love you. Not because you are perfect, but because you are real. I hope you know how rare that is. I hope you know that someone noticing your heart is more valuable than someone simply noticing your beauty. Because beauty changes, circumstances change, time changes everything. But the feeling of being deeply understood, that is something a person remembers forever. Before I finish telling you everything, I need you to know that I am not asking you for a promise tonight. I am not asking you to erase every doubt. I am not asking you to forget every moment that hurt. I am asking for something much harder. I am asking you to hear the truth. The whole truth. Because the hardest thing I have ever done is not building something impossible. It is admitting that the one thing I cannot imagine losing is you. I wish I could tell you that after accepting my feelings, everything became simple. It did not. Because love does not remove fear. Sometimes love reveals the fears you were able to hide from before. And my biggest fear was not that you would leave. My biggest fear was realizing that I might be the reason you leave. Because there was a moment when I had a choice. A moment when my mind told me one thing and my heart told me another. A moment when I almost chose the easier path. And if I had chosen it, you might never know how much you meant to me. You might never know that behind every quiet moment, behind every hesitation, behind every time I seemed distant, Daniel was fighting a battle between protecting himself and finally letting himself be loved. And the truth about that moment, the truth about the choice I almost made, is something I have never had the courage to say out loud. I have spent a long time thinking about whether I should tell you this. Not because I do not know what I feel, I know. That is the part that scares me. The uncertainty was never about whether you mattered. The uncertainty was about whether I was brave enough to accept what your presence changed inside me. Because when someone becomes important, love stops being a beautiful idea and becomes a mirror. And you showed me parts of myself I was not ready to face. You showed me the person behind the ambition, behind the plans, behind the endless movement, the person who, despite everything he has achieved, still wondered if he was capable of being loved without having to earn it. Have you ever met someone who made you question the walls you spent years building? Someone who did not break those walls by force, but simply stood there with enough patience that you finally wondered why you built them in the first place? That was you. You did not demand that I open my heart. You did not pressure me to explain every fear. You simply made me feel safe enough that eventually I wanted to. And that is rare. Because many people want to be loved for the image they create. But the deepest kind of love is when someone sees the unfinished parts of you and does not walk away. When someone sees your doubts and does not judge them. When someone sees your weaknesses and does not use them against you. You gave me that feeling. And maybe I did not appreciate it enough in the moments when I had it. Maybe I was too focused on protecting the future that I forgot to protect the person standing beside me. Maybe I was so busy trying to solve every problem that I forgot, some things are not problems to solve. Some things are gifts to appreciate. You were never a problem. You were never a distraction. You were never something that stood in the way of my goals. You were the person who reminded me why goals matter. Because what is the point of building a life if you cannot share the quiet moments with someone who understands your heart? What is the point of reaching the top of a mountain if there is nobody beside you when you finally look around? I used to think success was about reaching places nobody else could reach. But you made me realize that success is also about having someone who knows the person you were before anyone knew your name. Someone who remembers your fears before the world started celebrating your victories. Someone who knows your silence has meaning. Someone who understands that sometimes the strongest people are the ones who are secretly tired of always being strong. And I want to tell you something I never admitted. There were moments when I looked at you and felt something I could not explain. Not excitement. Not just happiness. Something deeper. Something heavier. A feeling that said, be careful. This person matters. Because when you find someone who matters, your heart starts creating fears you never had before. You start imagining losses that have not happened. You start worrying about conversations you have not had. You start wondering if one wrong decision could change everything. And that is exactly where I found myself. I was afraid of loving you because I knew love gives another person the ability to hurt you. Not intentionally. Not maliciously. But simply because they matter. The people who mean nothing to us cannot break us. Only the people we allow close enough can touch the places that hurt. And I allowed you close. Closer than I allowed almost anyone. But then something happened. Something inside me changed. I started asking myself questions I had avoided for years. Was I choosing the right things? Was I giving my attention to the things that truly mattered? Was I protecting my future? Or was I using my future as an excuse to avoid emotional risk? Because sometimes we tell ourselves we are being responsible when actually we are being afraid. Sometimes we call it patience when it is hesitation. Sometimes we call it logic when it is fear wearing a smarter disguise. And I began to realize something painful. I was not afraid of losing control. I was afraid of losing you. There is a difference. Control is something I can rebuild. Plans can change. Strategies can fail. Projects can end. But when you lose someone who touched your soul, you cannot simply create another version of that person. You cannot replace a voice. You cannot replace a memory. You cannot replace the feeling of being understood. Have you ever missed someone who was still there? Have you ever felt distance growing between two hearts even though nobody said goodbye? That kind of pain is difficult to explain. Because there is no dramatic ending, no final moment, no clear reason, just two people slowly becoming strangers while still caring deeply. And that possibility terrified me. Because I knew I had been creating distance. Not because my feelings changed. Because they became too powerful. I know that sounds impossible. But sometimes people run away from the things they want most. Sometimes they become quiet because they are overwhelmed. Sometimes they create space because they do not know how to handle the depth of what they feel. That was me. And I regret it. I regret every moment when you might have looked at my silence and thought you were not important. I regret every time you might have questioned your place in my life. I regret every time you needed reassurance and I gave you uncertainty. Because you deserved honesty. You deserved someone who could look at you and say, I am afraid, but I am still choosing you. Instead, I spent too much time trying to become fearless before I allowed myself to love. But I learned something. Nobody becomes fearless before taking a risk. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is carrying the fear and still moving forward. And loving you required courage. Real courage. Not the kind people celebrate, the quiet kind. The kind where you sit alone and admit the truth you have been avoiding. The kind where you accept that your heart is not a machine. The kind where you understand that not everything valuable can be measured. There was a moment when I almost convinced myself that choosing someone else would be easier. And that confession still hurts. Because the easier choice is not always the right choice. There are people who fit into your life easily. People who make sense on paper. People who seem like the perfect decision when you remove emotion from the equation. But love is not a spreadsheet. The heart does not always choose the most convenient path. And I almost forgot that. I almost confused comfort with connection. I almost confused simplicity with happiness. I almost walked towards something that looked easier while leaving behind something that felt real. And the thought of that still keeps me awake. Because what if I had chosen wrong? What if I had followed my fears instead of my heart? What if I had lost the person who truly understood me because I was too afraid to be understood? Have you ever had a moment where you realized you were standing at the edge of a decision that could change your entire life? A moment where one choice could create a future you cannot undo. That was where I was. And I need you to know something. I did not almost lose you because I stopped loving you. I almost lost you because I was still learning how to love. There is a difference. Some people think love is natural. That when the right person arrives, everything becomes easy. But sometimes the right person arrives and exposes every place where you still need to grow. They show you your selfishness, your fear, your hesitation, your old wounds. And they give you a choice. Stay the same and lose something precious, or change and become worthy of what you have been given. You gave me that choice. And I was afraid. Because changing yourself is harder than changing your circumstances. It is easier to move to a new city. It is easier to change plans. It is easier to start something new. But changing the way you love, changing the way you communicate, changing the way you allow someone into your life, that requires looking directly at yourself. And I had to face things I did not want to see. I had to admit that sometimes I pushed away the person I wanted closest. I had to admit that sometimes I expected you to understand feelings I never explained. I had to admit that I wanted you to read a heart that I had spent years keeping closed. That was unfair. You were not supposed to guess. You were not supposed to carry the weight of my silence. You were not supposed to prove your love while I was afraid to show mine. And I am sorry for that. Not a casual apology. Not words said just to make a difficult moment disappear. A real apology, the kind that comes when you finally understand the effect your fear had on someone you love. Because love is not only about what you feel. It is about what the other person experiences because of what you feel. And I want you to know that I have thought about your experience. The nights you may have wondered. The moments you may have questioned. The times you may have asked yourself, does he really care? I wish I could have answered every one of those moments. I wish I could have been there to tell you, I care more than I know how to explain. But there is still something you do not know. Something I kept hidden because I was afraid that if I told you, you would see me differently. You would see that beneath everything people think they know about me, there is still someone who has doubts. Someone who gets scared. Someone who does not always know the perfect thing to say. Someone who has made mistakes with the person he never wanted to hurt. And the truth is, the reason I almost walked away was not because another person was better. It was because I was trying to convince myself that choosing a life without emotional risk would be safer. I was trying to protect myself from a possible heartbreak. But I forgot something important. A life without risk is also a life without the deepest forms of love. And I cannot pretend anymore. I cannot keep hiding behind reasons. I cannot keep acting like losing you would be something I could simply accept. Because it would change me. It would leave a question in my heart that I do not think I could answer. The question of whether I lost something extraordinary because I was too afraid to fight for it. And there is another truth. A truth I have never told you. A truth that explains why this moment has been so difficult for me. Because the thing I was afraid of losing was not just you. It was the version of myself that existed when I was loved by you. And before you understand what I mean, you need to know what happened during the moment I almost made the decision that could have taken you away from me forever. I need you to know what happened when everything inside me was fighting against itself. I reached a point where I thought choosing distance would be the mature thing to do. I told myself that maybe love was supposed to become quieter. Maybe growing older meant becoming more practical. Maybe protecting my heart meant choosing the path with fewer unknowns. And for a moment, Daniel believed it. I convinced myself that a life without deep attachment would be easier. A life where nobody could disappoint me. A life where nobody could become important enough to take away my peace. But then I asked myself the question I was avoiding. What kind of peace is it when you have nobody to share it with? What kind of victory is it when the person you wanted beside you is no longer there? What kind of future are you protecting if you are sacrificing the very thing that makes that future meaningful? And that question changed everything. Because I realized I was not protecting myself. I was slowly losing myself. I was becoming someone who knew how to achieve but forgot how to feel. Someone who knew how to move forward but forgot how to stop and appreciate what was already in front of him. And you were in front of me. You were there. The person who never asked me to be perfect. The person who never needed me to have all the answers. The person who only wanted honesty. And somehow honesty became the thing I was most afraid to give. Because honesty meant admitting that I needed you. It meant admitting that I cared more than I wanted to admit. It meant admitting that the possibility of losing you hurt more than any failure I had ever experienced. Have you ever realized that the person you were trying to protect yourself from losing was the person you were slowly pushing away? That realization changes you. Because suddenly you stop blaming circumstances. You stop blaming timing. You stop blaming everything outside yourself. And you look inward. You ask yourself, was I really too busy? Was I really too uncertain? Or was I simply afraid to love someone who could truly see me? And the answer was painful. It was fear. Not a lack of love. Not a lack of care. Fear. Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of needing someone. Fear of giving another person the power to hurt you. But love has always required that risk. The greatest things in life have always required risk. You cannot build something meaningful without uncertainty. You cannot create something lasting without commitment. And you cannot love someone deeply while keeping one foot outside the door. I spent too much time standing at that door. Half entering, half leaving. Wanting you close, but still protecting myself from the possibility that you might one day walk away. And I finally understood something. The greatest tragedy is not losing someone. The greatest tragedy is losing someone because you were too afraid to show them they mattered. I do not want that story. I do not want a future where I look back and wonder what could have happened if I had been brave. I do not want memories of you to become lessons I learned too late. I want you to know the truth while I still have the chance to say it. You changed me. Not because you saved me. Not because I was incomplete without you. But because you reminded me that there was a softer side of me I had ignored for too long. The side that wanted quiet mornings. The side that wanted conversations without an agenda. The side that wanted to sit beside someone and feel completely understood without saying anything. That side of me existed before the world demanded strength from me. And you brought it back. That is why losing you felt different. Because losing you would not just mean losing a person. It would mean losing the connection to a part of myself I finally found again. I know love cannot be forced. I know promises cannot erase mistakes. I know words alone cannot repair every moment where silence caused pain. But I hope you understand this. Every hesitation I had came from fear. Every distance I created came from confusion. Every moment I seemed unsure was never because you were not enough. You were always enough. The question was whether I was brave enough to accept something good when it arrived. And I almost failed. That is the truth. I almost let fear make a decision that my heart never wanted. I almost chose a future that looked safe but felt empty. I almost walked away from the person who made me understand what home really means. And if you have ever wondered whether you mattered, if you have ever questioned whether your presence made a difference, I want you to hear this clearly. You did. You do. You always will. Because some people enter your life and leave memories. But some people enter your life and change the way you see everything afterward. You were that person for me. You changed the way I understand love. You changed the way I understand commitment. You changed the way I understand myself. And maybe that is why this confession took so long. Because some truths are easy to say when they are small. But the biggest truths are difficult because they carry consequences. Once I tell you I love you this deeply, I cannot pretend I do not. Once I admit how much you mean to me, I cannot hide behind distance anymore. Once I choose you, I have to show up. Not only when things are beautiful. Not only when everything feels easy. But during uncertainty. During disagreements. During moments when both people are tired. Because mature love is not proven by perfect days. It is proven by the decision to stay when life becomes complicated. And that is the decision I wanted to make. Not because I am afraid of being alone. I am not. I have spent enough time alone to know who I am. I choose you because life feels more meaningful when I imagine sharing it with you. I choose you because your happiness matters to me. I choose you because your voice became something I wanted to hear. I choose you because among all the possibilities life offered me, you were the one that felt real. But there is still one thing I need you to understand. The reason I waited so long to tell you everything is because I was afraid of what would happen after. I was afraid that maybe I had waited too long. Maybe my silence had already created a distance I could not cross. Maybe the person I was trying so hard not to lose had already learned how to live without me. And that thought broke something inside me. Because for the first time I understood what regret truly feels like. Regret is not remembering a mistake. Regret is standing in the future and realizing you had a chance to choose differently. A chance to speak. A chance to love openly. A chance to hold on. And you let fear take it away. I do not want to live with that regret. So this is me choosing honesty. This is me choosing courage. This is me finally saying the words I should have said when you were standing right in front of me. I love you. Not because you complete me. Not because I cannot survive without you. But because with you I became a better version of myself. And if tomorrow was uncertain, if time was shorter than I expected, if I had only one final opportunity to tell you what mattered most, Daniel would not talk about achievements. He would not talk about the things he built. He would not talk about the moments the world remembers. He would talk about you. The person who taught me that the greatest creation in life is not something you build with your hands. It is something you build with your heart. And I hope you know this. Before everything else disappears, before the noise fades, before the world moves on, you were the person I was grateful I found.